I am more. The road to becoming more
begins with knowing more,
with the desire to achieve more,
to learn more,
to grow more.
More embraces lifelong value.
More treats others with dignity.
More serves with excellence.
More shares knowledge.
More has integrity.
More walks the talk.
More is always on time.
More does the right thing.
More is innovative.
More is curious.
More is open-minded and creative.
More always adds value.
More leads by example.
More is energetic and passionate.
More welcomes diversity.
More says what needs to be said.
More turns work into play.
A manager into a leader. Familiar faces into family.
Colleagues into friends.
More funds a learner's dream. Helps realize a family's ambition.
Elevates a community.
And more so, builds a nation.
More than a provider of financial solutions. We are enablers of dreams. Fundi, know more, be more.
A very good morning, everyone. Welcome to this latest student wellness webinar brought to you by Fundi and the Mail and Guardian. My name is Thembekile Mrototo, your moderator for this session. You may know me as a broadcaster, television and radio news anchor, and it is my honor to be with you here today as we deal with the many issues facing students in South Africa. Now today, as I said, we're talking about student wellness. It's a key time of the year, the end of the year. Many of you will have just have gotten out of your assessments or going into your assessments now. And as we go into the end of the year period, we know academically a lot of stress to do with how you may have fared over the past year, but also a lot of anxiety to do with the future. What is happening next year? If you're in final year, for instance, what happens if you're looking for work? If you're returning to campus, you may be worried about how you're going to fund your studies in the next year. And we are here to talk about all of those issues affecting you as students on our various campuses in South Africa. The South African Depression and Anxiety Group, for example, says that 1 in 4 university students in South Africa suffer or are likely to be diagnosed with depression. 20% of students that SADC has surveyed have, in fact, said that they have dealt with or experienced suicidal thoughts. So a lot happening on our campuses as far as wellness, especially mental wellness and mental health is concerned. So between now and 12:30, we're going to hear from various people, including an expert in the field of psychology. We'll also hear from SRC leaders about the situation at their various institutions and how they are working to assist the many people who may be suffering in some way or form. But to better explain why it is that we've gathered here this morning, please allow me to introduce Mr. Benedict Johnson. He is the Fundi Executive Head for Educational Business Solutions. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah. No, yes, this subject is so important to us. I think previously we were all concerned about just throwing money to a solution, but I think the holistic view of a student need to be taken in consideration from physical, emotional, psychological, and social aspects that we need to think about to make sure a student is successful. But before I go there, thank you to the keynote, to Shanaaz for availing herself, and to all the SRC leadership. It's such an important subject that we need to address. Usually we're just concerned about is the money dispersed and so on, but Fundi has taken really a holistic view in terms of a student and how we can make a student successful. Because over the years, we've realized the dropout rates of first year students has risen continuously. And it's so important that we need to look at where is the underlying issues. And for Fundi, over the years, when we started in 1996, we were predominantly loans. And then we moved on from there where we started looking at allowance disbursements for students. And when we realized there's still more to that, you need to have mentoring, you need to have tutoring services also. Then we built on that also, where we moved along to a bursary support program. But then there's still one element that's still short in this holistic view, and that is the wellness. But you can't build systems when you don't hear from the students and understand what is the challenges and how can we as Fundi support their challenges in making sure they are successful. Because at the end of the day, if they are successful in their career paths, what will happen? The country will be successful. And that is where we want to be as Fundi, to support that, not only from a household maybe being successful, because with some of these leaders that we find now, they might be the first student that goes to university. And it's important that you support that, because the success of that one person will be the success of a whole household. It will be a success of a community. And it's so important for us at Fundi to make sure that everybody realizes their dreams. And that is where Fundi is at this juncture. So it's important for me really to listen to the experts, what is happening in their spaces, how can Fundi support them in this journey, making sure they're successful in whatever they do. I think for us at Fundi, the support that we want to give need to be holistic, and that is where we want to be from coming into this environment of university right up until graduation. And as I say, this is the last block of the puzzle that we really need to fit in to this whole big picture. And I hope during this conversation that we will have, fruitful discussions will happen, and I can take something away and come with a product that aligns to what the masses want in terms of how it supports them in everything. Yeah, Thembekile, that's from me. I think I'm just here to listen and see how I can support at the end of the day, because yeah, they are the future of this country. And how do you support that future is by making sure the structures is there to support them coming forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson, and thank you to you and the team at Fundi for bringing us all together today for what is, as you're saying, a very important conversation, because we aren't one-dimensional, are we, as people? And our experiences, even at a university campus, require that we are well in every facet of our being, because you cannot thrive academically, for example, if you don't have enough funding to get through varsity, if you're not well, if you're depressed, if you're anxious. So all of that has to be addressed in order for a person to truly thrive. And once again, we're thankful to you at Fundi and Mail and Guardian for allowing us the opportunity today to hear from the experts and the students themselves about what it is that is going on in order to, as you were saying, better protect and secure the future for many of this country's young people. And speaking of the experts, we've got someone with us this morning who is best placed, in fact, to help us understand what it is that we're discussing today in terms of student wellness. And she's been on a university campus and has worked quite closely with young people. I'm talking here about Ms. Shanaaz Kapery Randeria. She describes herself, in fact, as someone who's passionate about youth development and empowerment, has a strong emphasis on sexual and reproductive health, as well as mental health. She originally hails from the Eastern Cape in the city of Gqeberha, formerly Port Elizabeth, but has been in Gauteng since graduating as a diagnostic radiographer. Now, soon after that, she went on to qualify with a BA in psychology, and then completed her honors in psychology, both qualifications obtained through UNISA. Thereafter, she qualified with honors in her master's in international public health. This is at the University of Liverpool. Currently, she is a PhD candidate with the University of KwaZulu-Natal in the School of Public Health. The focus there on medical students' mental health. So quite key to what we're talking about today. Shanaaz has also worked in the health, community, and education sectors, where her work in that space was at a pediatric HIV clinic at Bara Hospital, where she in fact developed the psychosocial support program, which dealt with HIV positive adolescents and youth. She then worked briefly with prison rape survivors. So she has explored the multiple facets of wellness, especially for young people at various levels. With that then, let's welcome to the platform Ms. Shanaaz Kapery Randeria. Welcome, Shanaaz.
Thank you so much, Thembekile, and thank you, Fundi, and a special thank you to Mr. Johnson. I could not have said or introduced the topic any better. And as you mentioned, the students, they are the experts, and they are the ones we need to listen to. So thank you. We'll get into the discussion on the topic of student wellness is essential, or student success starts with student wellness. Thank you, Sean. Next slide. All right, so what we have on the screen are some of the comments that I hear from students. And I'm just wondering if there are any students in the audience. Does any of this resonate with you? Any of those actions, did you undertake any of them? And for those of us who work with students or connect and communicate with students regularly, have you heard any of these? And what I want to demonstrate with these very few quotes and what I hear from students is just how much our students deal with stresses as in their daily lives. Also, what comes out is, for example, when a student says, I tried a few study methods until I found one that works, what that is telling us is that actions and behavior have consequences. And depending on what that action or behavior is, the consequence can be either positive or negative. Thank you, Benny. All right, so Sorry, we're having a few technical issues. I see the Fundi logo is way up in the title of the slide. But be that as may, what we're going to be talking about, as we said, is student success starts with student wellness. And we'll be going through various topics on various issues on the topic. But what I'd like us to think about as we go through this discussion is, how are we measuring and defining student success? Is it, are we measuring it by the number of passes and fails every year? Is it by the quality of the passes? Is it how many students complete their degree within the specified time? Is it the number of dropouts? Is it the how long a student would take to be placed in a job post-graduation? So let's just think about that as we go through the presentation. So of course, we're going to start off with what student wellness is, and we'll start off with wellness in general. Then we'll go into a specific aspect of student wellness, which is student mental health. Then we will try and figure out why students experience mental health. And then lastly, we will try to figure out how do we promote good mental health in students. Thank you, Benny. All right, so let's start off with what student wellness is, and we'll start off with wellness in general. So if we think of wellness as a continuum where we have 6 people or 60 individuals on the one end, and at the other extreme end, we have optimal wellness. Our main aim is to get more towards the end, towards the side of optimal wellness. So there are many definitions of wellness, but I like the World Health Organization definition and the National Wellness Institute because it talks about wellness as a process. It talks about wellness as a holistic process, but it also talks about how we move towards that optimal wellness. So what's very good about the National Wellness Institute definition is it places a lot of emphasis on the individual to want to become well and therefore to move towards that successful or optimal existence. So when we look at the specific definition, the last definition of what student wellness is, again, we talk about a holistic process and where students are enabled to thrive. That doesn't mean we do it for them. What we want to do is create the environment that they will be motivated enough to take the opportunities to grow, develop, and then reach their full potential. So sorry, Benny, can you, Sean, can you just go back? And so what we see from the above definitions is that we're trying to get the students from surviving at university and becoming a professional to them thriving in the space. And that has implications for post-university. And also with the last definition, what we clearly see is that wellness is closely associated with academic potential, academic success, and personal growth and development. So let's take a look at a few of the attributes and characteristics of our students. Thank you, Sean. So again, let me just say that there are many, many attributes that have not been mentioned here, but I'm going to touch on a few, and this can then help us to think beyond the very obvious ones. And I'm not saying that these are the only obvious ones, but again, this is not an exhaustive list. So whilst we might think of students as a cohort, so for example, university students as one group, first year students as a group, second year students as a group, final year students as a group, and so on and so on, what we need to really focus on is that this group of individuals is not homogeneous. There are certain characteristics that are common, but that doesn't mean that everybody shares exactly the same circumstances or conditions. So let's take, for example, a student differs by gender. A student will differ in terms of the degree of preparation they've had for tertiary education. For some, as Thembekile mentioned and Mr. Johnson, a lot of our students are first-generation students, so very important to consider. In terms of socioeconomic status, again, there are many different ways of measuring socioeconomic status. There are different scales, there are different studies, but let's talk about the employment statistics. So, for example, the family that the student comes from, whoever the guardian or the parent or the caregiver is, could be fully employed, could be totally unemployed, could be an unskilled laborer, could be a informal trader, or the household, the family, and our students can be supported by the social grants or the SASSA grants as we know them. Other indicators of socioeconomic status could be, for example, whether there's running water in the house, whether there's electricity in the house. So again, there's a lot that can identify socioeconomic status. Family structure. So what is the family structure that our students come from? Is it a nuclear family where it's a mother, father, the student, and maybe siblings? Is it extended family where it's not just mother, father, student, and individual, but also grandparents and other relatives? Is it a single parent household? Is it a mother that's the single parent? Is it the father? Or is the student the head of the household? So that's what we call the child-headed households. Then we can go to the place and type of residence. So we know that our students come from various different types or various types of residence. So it could be urban, it could be semi-urban, it could be rural, it could be semi or peri-rural. It could be the type of so the place is it urban, rural, semi-urban, semi-rural, and then the type of residence, is it a place or a home built with bricks and cement? Is it in an informal settlement? Is it a room in a home? So again, variation there. In terms of technology exposure, well, this can range from none for some students to relatively advanced for some, where some students actually are exposed or take the subject of computer-aided technology at school. In terms of crime exposure, how safe is the home and the home environment? What is the level of violence? What is the level of gangsterism? What is the level of drugs and alcohol abuse? What are the levels of crime? To which degree are our students exposed to these environments? And then, of course, on average, a first-year student is between the ages of 18 to 20 years. Now, that can vary. I've worked with 16-year-olds who start at university, and we also work with 27-year-olds who start with university. So we're taking the average age of our student to be between 18 and 20 years. Let's go to a few statistics, and these come from studies around our student mental health. So the first one is by a study done in 2021 in South Africa, where the study found that 52% of university students have depression. And the next study was also done in South Africa. This is one of the only studies that studied student mental health to this extent. It was carried out by Professor Banchis, who is from Stellenbosch University, across 17 universities in South Africa, with just over 28,000 students. And there were many findings from that study, really, really essential findings. But most importantly, what came out of that is that 20% of university students need mental health support. This is one of the most recent studies. It was carried out in 2022, and the results were released in 2023. And finally, what is so essential for us to remember, to understand, and to really take note of is the developmental stage that our students are in. And so the World Health Organization would say that the ages from 12 to 19 is the adolescent stage. And then we have from there, the student will go into the adult stage after that. But the understanding and taking note of the the developmental stage of our students is vital for many, many reasons, not only for how we communicate. But when we are intervening or we are creating workshops or there are training sessions, what is the message we are sending? Are we empowering them? Are we speaking to what it actually means to be in the adolescent or emerging adulthood developmental stage? I'd like to focus on the mental health of this developmental stage. Thank you, Sean. Okay, so what are the defining features of our students in the developmental stage of adolescence? The question, or what they really are focused on is, who am I? And what do I want with my life? What do I want to do with my life? So there's a lot of self-discovery. But before I go into some of the details, I want to just mention that there's a transition in terms of how we move from birth to adulthood. And while it's not, there's a lot of variation in terms of the ages and the milestones, when and how they are reached. But with our students, what we have is they come in the late adolescent stage. Remember, we said the World Health Organization defines adolescence from 12 to 19. Our students coming from 18 to 20. So when students are coming into university, biologically, they are adults. So they've developed as into adults, right, on a physical, biological level. But those who know in the know are saying that actually the maturity of these students is not those of adults. They are still between the two stages. And so a new term or a new a stage was introduced for that period of development where the student or the young person is trying to maneuver or move towards the developmental stage, and that is called emerging adulthood. So emerging adulthood is usually from the ages of 18 to 25, with the caveat that actually the young person can become an adult sooner than 25 years of age, but the upper limit is found to be 25. And what's also important to note about our young people and our students is parenting and settling into a long-term relationship is seeming to become more postponed. So students are settling into a stable relationship much later. Parenting, the same. Women are deciding to have children much later on in their years. And also the idea of our studying is fulfilling, and how earning your degree and doing well in the academic space is also advantageous. So our young people are studying longer and more before they settle into a job. And even the jobs that they go into, it takes a while for them to settle into a job that they're satisfied with and they want to remain in and grow and develop in it. All right, so let's go. Sorry, again, we have some technical issues. The first square talks about brain development. And so the brain development is actually rapid during the adolescent stage and towards the end of it. So more or less the time when our students are coming into university, it's where the higher order cognitive functioning, the prefrontal cortex, is really being refined. And that is talking to the problem-solving skills, rational thinking, making judgments of others and themselves. So what's happening at this stage is the concrete thinking, and the concrete thinking is about where our young people can make sense of something by being the here and now and relating to their personal experience. So the concrete thinking is still there, somewhat to a lesser, with some, and for others not more, but the abstract thinking is already coming into place. So that is being able to think of others' perspectives, for example, being able to realize that actually my perspective isn't the only perspective. So there's that kind of higher order thinking that comes into play. And also what studies are finding, and there's a lot of research to back this up, is that social psychological and psychopathology emerges during our student lives. So that's that adolescent, emerging adulthood stage of development. So what we're talking about here are things like your depression, anxiety, eating disorders, addictions, to mention a few. And so the other important thing is the poor impulse control and the increase in reward-seeking behavior. And we see that, for example, where a student, not a student necessarily, but a young person would drive under the influence of alcohol. This thrill-seeking behavior of driving and maybe sticking the head out of the roof to, catch the air as they're driving along. So a lot of that kind of impulse control and reward-seeking behaviors. So reward-seeking doesn't necessarily only have to be a positive reward. It could be stealing something and then getting the satisfaction of maybe leaving without being caught, and then, showing it off to their friends. And then a stressor that is not particularly related to brain development, but which is an added stressor to the already difficult situation our young people find them in, our students, is the transition into tertiary education. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about that later on. So what we've demonstrated here is the vulnerability of our students' mental health. And what is also important to mention here is, at the moment, our interventions are more reactive. So, for example, it's how do we manage your stress? How do we decrease your stress? But actually, what we should be doing is we should be encouraging preventative measures so that this doesn't, so we try and prevent it from happening in the first place. Thank you, Sean. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why student wellness is important for student success. So what I have below are some elements of student wellness that are specifically that focus specifically on the individual. So Thembekile and Mr. Johnson mentioned financial security. There's also food security. But what I'm focusing on here are a few of the personal elements of wellness. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I find that this is quite sufficient as a starting point. So I've taken this from various sources. So there is no one source that will give you all of this in one place, but this is what I have found to be very useful. And so what's also important to remember is that each of these elements contributes to academic performance. So let's start up with physical and mental health. Physical and mental health, together with emotional well-being, those three are the foundations for everything that comes in terms of academic performance, in terms of overall wellness. So physical and mental health, for example, if that is in place with our students or young people, or even the individual, whoever the individual is, the person or the student becomes more energetic, more enthusiastic about what they're doing. They become focused. Their resilience is improved. And when mental health is good, what we then do is we manage and decrease our stress levels in that academic environment that's so important, and then increase our concentration, our decision-making, and our academic performance, as I say, is obviously positively affected. Emotional well-being is really about knowing what we are feeling and why we are feeling the way we do. So oftentimes with our young people, our young students, we find that they know what they are feeling, but they don't know how to change it. So for example, a student might say, I'm feeling really angry, and act out, but not have the techniques or the life experience to be able to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I can do in a constructive way to help myself reach a level of emotional well-being. So when students' emotional well-being is good, their self-esteem is improved, their motivation is also better. And when that happens, they have a positive outlook, they are engaged with their studies, and they persevere during challenging times. And then we come to social connections. So loneliness and isolation is one of the most common stresses cited by new students, and sometimes not even only new students. So what happens with social connections when they are formed? The student has a sense of belonging and a sense of being valued. And that in itself creates a feeling of well-being. And then we come to a really big one, building resilience. There are many studies that implicate resilience in good mental health and therefore, by extension, into good academic performance. So what is resilience? Resilience is both an outcome and it's a process. And what it is when we successfully adapt to a challenging or difficult life situation. Another way of saying it is our ability to withstand adverse effects, to grow, and to bounce back from adversity. Another important feature about resilience is that even though we go through this difficult stage, we have the ability to emerge from it, either in a situation or a condition before the event or in a better position or situation. Let's move on to goal setting. So goal setting imparts to the student a sense of control, a sense of purpose. And why is that? When we set goals with our students, and this can be a collaborative process, and I found that with young people, it's really to have somebody with a little bit more life experience when it comes to goal setting. So students will be able to, in that process of setting goals, students will be able to identify what it is they want to achieve. And then when we put the strategies in place, it empowers them to say, okay, this is what I want, this is how I'm going to get it. But also important is make sure your students understand, or all of us for that matter, we understand the why. Why is this the goal I want to achieve? So for example, it's not okay to just say, well, my goal is to pass every year and get my degree. It's asking the next question. So why is that important? Well, if I pass every year and I get my degree, I can get into a job. Okay, that's cool. So why is that important? Well, when I get a job, I'm going to be able to earn some money. Great, that really is cool. But why is that important? When I have money. So can you see how we are actually encouraging the students to think about the why, but we're also helping them to think analytically. We're also helping to think strategically. So goal setting in itself is great, but there are other added advantages that come into the process of goal setting and setting up strategies. And then, of course, we come to a good lifestyle choice. Now, this can mean many different things to many different people, but the common elements of choosing a good lifestyle, first of all, there's the word choice, which means that there's an element of somebody must want to do this. It can't be forced onto somebody. So it's that wanting or that desire to improve the quality of our life. And that can include, for example, eating nutritional meals, physical activity. And physical activity doesn't mean I'm training to run the Comrades Marathon. Physical activity could be skipping in your room, doing an indoor training session, walking, running up and down the steps. It really doesn't matter. But what is important is that physical activity that raises the heart rate is what is desired. And then, of course, we have good sleep habits. And for some people, good life choices can include spirituality. And spirituality for those people, and for a lot of us, also adds purpose and meaning and value to our life. So what's also what we need to then think about is how important cognitive function is in order for us to ensure overall wellness. And then lastly, the long-term focus, what that is speaking to is if we introduce the good or the desire and that students can see the value of investing in their wellness early on, that will then translate into beyond the student years into their work. And what we are saying here is that when we are introducing these wellness elements at an early age, the student, once graduating in the world of work, will therefore be able to self-heal, because they'll understand that this is stressing me out, or this is causing me a little bit of discomfort. Why is that? What can I do about it? So that actually results in more competent, more efficient professional. And then, of course, just as to round it all up, wellness is essential in the academic journey, because what we want, the ultimate goal, is for our students to fulfill their goals, whether it's professional, whether it's personal, or combination of both, and that we provide the environment for this to happen, so that learning and growing can happen in an optimal environment. The flip side of this is where wellness is lacking, student involvement, academic performance is going to be it's not going to be great. So we can have absenteeism. We can have students who don't engage with either the lectures or don't engage with lecturers. They can drop out, and at the very on the severe end, students can commit suicide. Thank you, Sean. Okay, so now we'll get into the specifics of mental health, which is a really important component of overall wellness. And again, there will be many definitions of what mental health is. What is really important, though, is that we get an understanding of, is mental health something that we must expect, or is it something that we need to work towards? So Masiviwe is an online mental health platform, and I would really encourage you to subscribe, because the information they provide is practical, it's succinct, it's to the point, and it's all relatable. And what they are saying is, and I think for me, this is really the crux of it all. We all have mental health. And importantly, it's our responsibility to take care of it. So what this is saying is that mental health doesn't only have to come to consciousness, or we need to do something when somebody is struggling with a mental health issue or condition. It's something we all have to pay attention to. And as we've seen from the elements of wellness, mental health is so important for concentration, problem solving, and increased academic performance. The other really good definition of mental health is by the World Health Organization. And what this is saying is that mental health is vital for our functioning in every sphere of our being, at every stage of our lives. And also, when that is in place, we then can tap into our pro-social behavior and our ultimate goal of, when we succeed, we take our communities with us. And so with good mental health, that can happen. So just some of what mental health looks like, and I'm not going to talk about specifics of individuals, but what are some of the things we mean when we say somebody has a mental health issue or condition? It can be things like your stress, extreme stress. It could be depression, anxiety. It could be panic attacks. It could be substance abuse. It could be addiction, eating disorders, PTSD, and so on and so on. So one of the things that comes out from studies and research, but also in my experience over the nearly 2 decades working with young people, is that students enter the higher education institutions with a relatively good level of mental health, physical health, emotional health. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everybody's at the same level. What the life experiences that the individual experiences before entering the higher education institution has a huge impact on the physical, mental, and emotional, or the level of the health. But what studies have also found, and again, I say in my experience, is that in the first year of study, within the first few months, you see depression and anxiety either appearing or being exacerbated. And also what's important with mental health is at the university level is there are some degrees where mental health outcomes are actually worse than for others. So for example, your medical students, their mental health is way worse than that of any other student population. Also, their suicide levels are almost 4 times higher than the general student population. And then in general, we find that student mental health is often worse than those who are not students. Thank you, Sean. All right, and we're going to look at a few of the reasons why students experience poor mental health. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are studies that, every day there are studies coming out that adds to the stresses of our students and their mental health. But let's talk about, so for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to divide it into personal stresses and academic stresses. So personal stresses, we said, for example, can be financial, food insecurity. What a lot of our students are experiencing is when they go to a university, it's often in a city where they didn't grow up in. So they're leaving home, they're leaving their supportive and familiar environment, and this can often lead to feelings of isolation when they are on campuses. Also, they not taking good care of themselves because for the first time, they now have to buy food, cook food, think about what is healthy, what is not healthy. They may suffer from sleep deprivation, and that could be for various reasons. It could be that they're homesick. It could be as a result of all the social activities happening. There's also a lot of, there's accessibility to alcohol and substances, and students might overindulge in that. There's also the pressure from home that once you are at university and, for example, if you are being funded, that you need to start sending money home so that we can also benefit from that. And also as part of that whole process where students feel I'm in a place with a roof, running water, hot water, electricity. My family at home don't have those conditions under which they live. Secondly, they don't have food. And here I am with enough money to buy food for the month. So that feelings of guilt is also another stressor. And another one would be when students who are not from maybe the big cosmopolitan cities, when they come to the university, they see themselves as different, the way they dress, the way they look. And that in itself is a stressor as well. And I'll never forget in one of my sessions with a very highly qualified physician, he said, when he's from deep rural Eastern Cape, and he went to medical school at UCT. And he said, when you arrive at university, you come there with your gogo. You look different. Your skin is shining because it's full of Vaseline. Your hair is different. He says, some of us think we look ugly. So that for me was so profound that at that, almost that visceral level, that this kind of feeling different, standing out, not feeling good enough, not belonging is already so integral right from the start of when the student is at university. And then we get to some of the academic pressures. And so one of the big, one of the well-documented reasons why students drop out is that there is no career alignment with personality, for example, their expectations and what they know about the degree. So that can be one of the first signs of the academic challenges, is that, wait, hold on. I said I want to be an electrical engineer, but now that I'm attending lectures, it's like, I don't want to do this. This isn't what I'm made for. So that's the one thing, career alignment. The other thing with career is sometimes our students are forced into taking a certain career path. There's the expectation from the family that you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be an engineer. And actually, the student wants to be a teacher. All right. With the advancement of technology, with AI, and we no longer, AI is not being introduced. We are in the fourth industrial revolution. We are here. It's happening as we speak. So the skills that are required in the 21st century might not be what our students have been exposed to, have been spoken to about. So they might not know, or they might not be prepared for what the skills are that they need. The processes that are required or through which education happens at university is very different for many of our students. For example, exams, assignments, lectures were all done in person. You wrote your assignment out with pen and paper and you handed it in to somebody. When you get to university, pretty much everything is done online. So for those students who come in without having exposure to or experience working with technology, this is a huge stressor, and can be something as simple as, because I'm not good at typing, I was late submitting my assignment. So it's not through lack of intelligence or lack of even study techniques. It's the technology in terms of making sure that the submission happens. That's the stressor. Also, what's different from school, and which is a big stressor for students, is when they come into a lecture hall, it's filled with some of the degrees and some of the courses, hundreds of students. So you are one face in a myriad of faces. You don't know anybody, nobody knows you. So number one is the size. It's impersonal. You feel out of place, or you feel isolated, or you feel like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Then the language in which our students are being taught is mostly English, and in some is English and Afrikaans, but that's not all our students' home language, first language. So understanding and expression are both stresses. The content might be unfamiliar. So often I hear students say, I'm doing physics, but when I went to the physics lecture, I wondered, is this physics? Because this isn't the physics I did at school. Also, the pace and the volume of work are really big stresses, because not only is it because of the pace and the volume, but also there's nobody to structure the learning for them. So the students now have to do that all by themselves. They need to figure out what their study technique is, what strategy works best for them, how to manage their time effectively, so they cover everything and they do everything that is expected of them. And then, of course, there's the social distractions that happen on campus. Budgeting and finance is a big one too. Students don't know how to handle their allowances. Well, that's one side of it, but then we also have situations where allowances are not always consistent. They're not always either consistent in when it's being provided, and also the amounts. Right, thank you, Sean. All right, so let's talk, this is really broadly about the possible pathways to what can lead to poor mental health. Sorry, I just want to clear my screen. Sorry about that. Right, so there's many studies, and there's also, again, from my personal experience working with young people, whether they're students or patients or inmates in prisons, that sometimes it just takes one situation or one life challenge that can change the mental health of an individual or a student or a young person. And it could be something like the loss of a relationship, where a relationship could be a friend, a very close friend. It could be a romantic relationship. It could be where family members are no longer, where they no longer have connection with the individual. So one of the big key mental health issues that can result, and I'm not saying it's the only one, but depression is not unlikely in these situations. And then we can also have a combination of events and situations that can contribute to mental health. So let's say, for example, a student is preparing for a test which he's writing in 3 days' time. So first of all, the student is sitting at the individual level with this high workload. So preparing for a test, but in the meantime, other work is coming in. So it's about managing time, managing that workload, but also focusing on preparing for the exam. So stressor number one is the workload, and the fact that the student's feeling, how am I going to get through this, right? That's stressor number one. Then number two, we have on the social level, we have peer pressure. That's a big stressor because what our young people, and as part of that developmental stage of emerging adulthood, is they want to feel part of a group. They want to feel accepted. They want to feel like they belong. And so when there are rest parties, for example, it's very easy for them, not easy, but it's something they will seriously consider. It's like, I need to go and be, have some fun, be with people that are like me, where I feel comfortable, where I feel accepted. And so the student might say, for example, well, I'm really feeling tired. I'm sitting with my books. I'm not learning anything. Let me go to the party. Maybe that distraction will be good for me. But I'm going to leave early so that I can have a good sleep and start up fresh again early tomorrow morning. So maybe the student goes to the party, and before the student knows it, he's had alcohol, he's enjoying the time at the party, and so he's forgetting about time. By the time he gets home, it's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. There's no way he's going to be able to study at that time. So he gets into bed and sleeps late until late the next morning. So massive time chunk taken out of his study preparation. Stressor number three. And then, of course, one of the big stresses for our students is at the institutional level. Academic pressure, not only to pass, but to perform well. And academic performance is related. It can really give rise to other things. For example, if you pass, you remain in res. If you pass, and even if you pass with a certain degree, you are allowed to continue into the next block, into the next semester, or continue with the program. And then the competitiveness that forms part of the academic environment, that too is another stressor. So what we can see now is that the stresses are building on each other. So not at any level is there any kind of reduction or alleviation of stress, but things are just happening and piling up, and it's become cumulative. And so what happens? The student goes to write the test feeling ill-prepared, feeling frustrated, maybe even angry. And so likely outcomes, student could fail, student might pass, but student might pass and not get the results they want. And so what we need to really understand here in this process is that the stress of our young people is variable, right? And it's at different levels, and it can be increase as the stresses pile up. So there is no one way that our stresses are or one way that our mental health is impacted poorly. All right. We can move on, Sean. Thank you. All right. And then for me, this is a really big one. We need to make sure that we accept that certain situations or certain experiences will evoke certain feelings and emotions. That it's not always a bad thing when something happens and we respond in a way that helps us deal with it. So for example, let's say a student has never failed a test. It can be in first year, or it can be in second, or any other year. But let's use a first year student. So remember, many of our first year students have never experienced academic failure. So they come from school, matric, where they've all got, or the student has got straight A's. They were sometimes the ones who would teach lessons in classes. They would be the ones that other students would want to come to when they are struggling. So now the student comes into higher education institution and they fail the test. Now, what would be the normal reaction when you fail a test for the first time? You'd feel disappointed, you'll be hurt, you'll be angry, you'll feel resentful because you might think, I've been studying all this time while others were out partying and I'm the one who failed. So very important to understand that. And then also, when a student is experiencing all these feelings, it's okay for certain reactions to that. So for example, if the student is crying, That's acceptable when you are disappointed. If the student feels after getting that test result, I just want to be alone in my room, I need to process this, work with this, that's absolutely fine. If the student, for example, says, I'm just going to binge watch series, also fine. It's not escapism. It's a way of dealing with something that has happened, an adverse event. What the student needs in that instance is not a psychologist. The student has normal reactions to a negative event. So what the student needs there is a good support system. People, other students, family, even staff or organizations where you have coordinators that work with our students, to affirm them, to show them support, and to be there for them. In terms of where that can go, that's where we need to be careful, because that normal reaction, if it's not dealt with by the individual and there are no red flag or warning systems in place, that can very quickly transform into a mental health condition. And what we need to be encouraging our students is, when is the right time to be asking for help? And when I say the right time, there is no one rule for everyone. For example, with the student, if the student feels like after the weekend, I'm still not feeling better, I'm still not coming to grips with it, I actually don't want to go to lectures anymore, I'm feeling like I don't want to get out of bed, what's the purpose? That is a sign that the student needs to go and ask for help. Now, again, at that stage, the student might speak to a psychologist. They don't have to. It could be I speak to a friend. It could be I go to my lecturer, my course coordinator, whoever that may be. But the important thing is, help-seeking behavior is a really, really important function in terms of maintaining our student wellness. So study after study indicates that poor mental health adversely affects academic performance. And so what we find is that academic performance declines, our dropout rate might decline, and as I said earlier, that we, sure, thank you, my time's running out. Okay, so let's quickly, before I move on, let's see where we are at this moment. So we have established, one, that wellness is a holistic process and that there are choices involved where we can move towards optimal functioning. We also found that when elements of wellness are in place and they are good, we get optimal academic performance and we get efficient professional graduates. We've also established that our students' mental health is vulnerable, and that where mental health is poor, academic performance will suffer. And lastly, we said that student wellness is also a holistic place. And when the environment is conducive to wellness, then growth, development, and attaining full potential is very, very, very possible. And all that in the academic environment. So if we look at what was the purpose, what was the discussion about, student success starts with student wellness, I think we've reached that stage where we can say, yes, it is important. And then I'm quickly going to wrap up now. So Sean, if we can go to the next slide. So my time's running out. What I would like to say is we need to decide on whose responsibility it is to promote student wellness. And this is contentious. There are articles about who says what and whose responsibility it is. But in my opinion, it is everybody's responsibility that we promote student wellness. And that includes the student, him or herself. And also, what we need is an environment where students themselves are making sure or connecting with other students so that they can also help each other with this wellness. So for example, how many times have we heard when a student committed suicide, friends say, I never thought, I didn't know. And that's because when we meet students, we're like, hello, how are you? And we are in a hurry. That's the way we are. We are busy. We need to get to the next place. What we need is to take the time and say, how are you? And wait to hear the response. So to wrap up, institutions and organizations that work with students when I say we, research and my experience is learning strategies, wellness strategies and opportunities are best placed in that first few months when a student starts. So again, I don't have the time to go into any of this, but what I do want to say is our communication with our students needs to be at a level where they can connect with it, where they get the message. So for example, are we sending out information about wellness programs, workshop, mental health, events that promote wellness? Are we sending that via email? Is that the most appropriate? Is that where our students are focusing? Actually not. So just to give you an example, one of my students went off WhatsApp because he wanted to focus on studies. So the only way I can reach my students is through WhatsApp or SMS or phone, because I don't live in the city. I took care of students across 6 universities. And so I said, well, okay, send me an SMS. And he said to me, SMS? What is that? I think that's something from your generation. So I think that just brings the point home that we need to communicate with our students on a platform that they are happy with. So it's your Instagrams, not even Facebook. I think Facebook is even another one of those that's part of my generation. And importantly, is our communication, is it encouraging empowerment, or is it punitive? And then, of course, building resilience, the environment at universities and those at organizations who work with our students can provide, can definitely create the environment where our students can build their resilience. I wanted to do a little bit of a fun thing, and maybe Bulawa and Thembekile, if you will just give me 2 more minutes. Sean, we can move to the next slide. This is just for me. It's important that as part of my presence and as part of my purpose, that I leave people, whether they're students or adults or friends or family, with resources that can help them with their wellness. So let's quickly do a quick fun stress reliever. So I'm going to ask you to just put out your forefinger and your thumb. Sean, is it possible for me to see some of the screens? Okay, if not, what we're going to do is we're going to place thumb and index finger on each other. So left thumb, right thumb, left finger, and then we're going to alternate. So you're going to take right index finger and move it to left thumb. So in actual fact is we're walking. The fingers are walking. This is an excellent stress reliever. Focus on the movement. When you are stressing before you write an exam, before you're doing a presentation, do this. It's cross-brain activity, but also it's relaxing because the pressure points, that's a grounding experience. All right. And then, Sean, if you can just bring up that last slide for me. These are my contact details. You can contact me via email. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to discuss this further. As I said, this is a really high-level discussion. We haven't gone into the details of the how and the why. So thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you very much for that. That was Shanaaz Kapery Randeria speaking to us, a psychologist, this morning, well, afternoon now, as we continue to focus on student wellness, brought together once again today by Fundi and the team at Mail and Guardian. And Shanaaz mentioned something very important during that presentation, a very detailed presentation for which we are grateful, that we need to hear from you, the students, about what it is that you're experiencing, what you're feeling, what you are dealing with. And to help us better understand that, in fact, and we're going to work your comments and questions, which I've been looking at, by the way, into this next conversation. I'm happy to bring into the chat SRC leaders from the universities of Pretoria, Rhodes, and University of Johannesburg. First up is Njabulo Sibego from the University of Pretoria. We also have with us today Abusheni Kyala from Rhodes and Ntando Mhlongo from the University of Johannesburg. My thanks to all of you for joining us. If I can begin then with you, perhaps, Ntando, your observations at UJ, just in terms of student wellness and everything that we've covered, especially in the presentation with Shanaaz. How are students coping?
Good afternoon to everyone. I think Shanaaz really covered it quite well. But in the broader context of things, we really also on the ground are facing a lot of challenges with our mostly Black students that suffer, in terms of their callings, cultural things. So as the University of Johannesburg and as the Student Representative Council there, we've also now tried to look into how do we then amend our policies to cater for these students that go through these traditional callings, that go through all of these cultural things, so that we don't now end up with students that are facing F7 exclusions. We also have a big problem of, period poverty. Our students not having access to sanitary pads, our students not having access to, basic needs like toiletries, food and security, as mentioned before. So we are at a point where we're really, really trying to push the university into really paying attention to these things, because these are things that also, affect the esteem needs of our students, and as a result, affect their mental health in the broader sense.
And Jabulo Ndano makes such a good point there about how issues that emanate from off-campus play a role in the wellness and the performance of students on campus. How are you responding at UP?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy how the external part of whatever happens outside of the university space gets to affect students' lives. You see with the NSS situation, for example, that corruption happens in a building in Cape Town, but then students here in our universities are not receiving allowances, and there's no action that's been taken to say, hey guys, we made a mistake, let's try to help you guys. And that's a big issue because even when with the programs that we have at the University of Victoria, such as what the prof has spoken of, resilience training to develop people's resilience skills. There's just certain instances that happen that are just so difficult for an individual to even, go through and bear the brunt of it all. And it's just always very difficult to balance the resilience part of it all, but also the unexpected turn of events that take place that put you in such a deep hole, because the student not receiving allowances for 3-4 months is difficult. And it's not because they chose to not receive these allowances, but it's because the state has put such a burden on them. And with your resilience of 100%, it's very difficult to move past that and be able to cope at school and to be able to interact with people on a daily basis. So we can put as many measures as possible, but I think it is still very difficult. And I think it's a long walk to Uhuru, and it's going to be very difficult for us to achieve this utopian society within our universities where mental health is healthy, you know what I mean? But it's a long process that we're going to have to take on.
And Jabulo used one word I want to pick up on, resilience. And just on that, for example, in our chat box now, I was looking at a comment from someone who was saying this: being a breadwinner while in varsity is hard. This person, I don't want to name them in case I don't want other people to identify them, then says that, for example, they get a request from their mother for help, asking for food, while they, on campus, also have nothing to eat. And it speaks, does it not, to how the holistic challenges of being a person, a young person in a predominantly Black country where people are still largely poor, factor into how we survive on campus.
Definitely. I definitely agree with you. And I think just in addition to that, it was mentioned before, really the adverse effects that come with being first generational. In addition to you trying to support your family back home, you're also trying to make sure that you advance at a steady pace to make sure that you're actually able to increase that support back home. And I think just adding to those holistic changes, there's so many different obstacles that go to that. So when you come from a sociological background where you are faced with having to give back to your family, you'll find that students have to face that challenge of having to transition from a high school that didn't incorporate the same thing that a university did. So I think here, those university, what we try to do is not to act in silos, to really have a collaborative effect between our open community and our on-campus residences. because we understand that there's so many students that are facing these things. I also think that the problem with students that have to act as the breadwinner is that you'll find oftentimes they come from families that have not destigmatized the idea or the notion around mental health. So you can't even have those conversations of "Jonga mama, jonga tata." I'm actually unable right now to balance the responsibilities of being a student, to balance having to be able to advance so I can give back more home with the obligation that I have back home. So it really is just a very bad balancing act. Thank you.
I want to take that and bring you back into the conversation, Dando. Two things I want to pick up on where Abusheni was talking to us there. The pressure from back home, right? Because once you're at university, especially if you come, like many of us did, from families where you were the first person to make it to university, you've got the pressure to succeed once you're there, but also pressure to provide for those back home to help either immediately or perhaps in the next 2-3 years at post-grad level. Another comment here spoke about how a lack of support, especially in that context, can lead to people dropping out. How do we prevent that?
Look, we really do come from backgrounds that firstly do not understand mental health at all. And there's a huge gap in terms of, like you're saying, we're the first students to come into university. So of course, the people that we have left at home have a very minimal understanding of the challenges that we are facing when we are at school. And, you know, there's a lot of things that come into play as well with our families, things like your black tax, some may call things like, you know, just general family responsibility. So I also saw one of the comments in the chat that if you are in that space, then we as students really need to then put ourselves first, because at the end of the day, how are you going to manage to take care of those back home when you yourself are struggling academically at school? So being able to you know, let your family know that this is where I'm at, this is the allowance that I'm getting, and this is what I can afford to you know, send back home in order to help there and there. Putting your mental health first, acknowledging that this is where you are, and sort of then, you know, trying to navigate those and not dwelling much on them in such a sense that it affects your academics, in a sense that even in the near future, you are then unable to fend for your family because you've had to drop out, you've been excluded academically, you are unable to pay for your fees because now you've been excluded financially as well from the institution. You cannot come back into the system. So just, yeah, that ground level in terms of yourself and the ones that you've left back home, so that in the long term, you're able to achieve what you had initially came to university for.
And Dando, Sizi, where Lupondo in the chat box has come back again, says one of the things they've noted is, in fact, an increase in students abusing alcohol as a means to cope with stress. Let's talk about how that factors into perhaps the helplessness that people feel, and how most of us may think we're having fun because you're young adults, everyone is building a social life, but a lot of people are drinking and taking other substances just to make it through the everyday grind, aren't they?
That is correct, indeed. I think also it stems from, like I said, we are not educated on our mental health. We do not know, even when you're in a mental crisis, you're not aware. And as you're saying, you're thinking, I'm just drinking because, you know, it's fun, I'm with my friends and whatever it may be. But in the real essence of it, you're drinking so that you can cope day to day. So education platforms like these, where we educate each other on mental health, so that even if you are in a mental debacle, you are able to identify firstly that this is the challenge that I'm faced with. And even when you do turn to things like alcohol, you don't shun it for it's just fun, or it's, you are aware of the mental states that you are in, and you do reach out to, I know most universities have psych facilities, you know, they have people that you know, take you through therapy for free, that is. So you're able to reach out in terms of that, because you've identified that you are not in a good mental state. So instead of, you know, overdosing on substances and alcohol, you're able to you know, maximize on the resources that are there at that particular time.
And Jabula, how much is available by way of resources? I know SRCs want to help, but you're also students. a lot of you often don't come with a psychology background because we're all studying or reading for so many different qualifications. How much are you able to do in terms of assistance, and how's the university meeting you halfway to make sure that student wellness is a priority?
Well, the university has an array of programs. We have a student counseling unit, which is a department that's specifically focused on assisting students with mental health issues. It has therapy for students who might need. It has programs that assist with resilience, which are online and can be used wherever students are, whenever they may need. But there's a certain limitation that obviously is there in terms of the availability of therapists and the likes of professionals like that for the number of students that we have on campus. And when you have a lot of students and a lot of campuses as well, it becomes difficult to even get an appointment with a therapist. You know, you'll have something happen in October, but then the only time you can get a free therapist would be 3 months from now, which is a bit difficult in the sense that how do I deal with the mental health issues that I have in this current moment? So there are programs, but there's a limitation, and there's also certain factors that we need to consider, especially because, like we had stated earlier, that there's
Right.
as Black people, there's certain issues that we might have that a therapist of that is white might not understand necessarily, or might not be able to relate to as such. For example, being sending money back home because your parents can't even afford, and you're surviving off of your 1.5 from NSFAS is a very niche problem, if I could say, and it's very difficult to even if a student comes to me and says this is the issue I'm facing, it's very difficult to even begin to put myself in their shoes to say, I wonder how on earth are you even, like surviving when you only have 300, 400 Rand for an entire month. So if there's certain limitations that are there with the programs, but there is an effort. There is an effort.
And just on the point about an effort, Njabulo, how much of an effort is there? Because you mentioned, for example, the very unique problems sometimes that you're facing as a young Black person from a previously disadvantaged or still disadvantaged background, in fact, because if you're, for example, still having to send money back home to help your parents and your siblings eat, you're very much still disadvantaged, right? You've got earlier, Ndando was telling us about young people who are going through an ancestral calling, and we know there's even research that talks about how that can sometimes be misinterpreted as a mental illness based on Western learning or study. How are we doing in trying to open up the space so there is an understanding of those nuances that may be unique to a certain demographic within the student population?
What we've tried to do, and it's something we always fight with the university with, is that the spaces need to be opened, especially when it comes to tackling mental health issues. There's a certain level of peer counseling that's needed sometimes, where you're able to speak to someone that looks like you, acts like you, goes to the same classes as you, and you being able to share your hearts with them, and then being able to understand and say, look, man, perhaps try this and this and this. We've tried to get students that are in the field of therapy or psychology to at least come do practicals and come hear us and try to assist. It's always difficult to work within bureaucracies because they always want, it must be a professional that's being certified by a board, but sometimes you just need a chat, and the need to have certain levels of peer counseling within residences, within private accommodation, within faculty even, is very important. And that's why we also push to have these individuals that are not necessarily 100% certified board members of PsyCA or something like that, but they're individuals that understand. And because I understand where you're coming from, and I know in first year, I also have the same issues that you're having, I also struggle to adapt with an institution that is a previously Afrikaner institution. I also had trouble switching on a computer, and that's where that peer counseling comes into effect, where even though your therapist and campus might not understand your issues, which is very problematic in itself, but at least you're able to come out and say, hey, that lady didn't help me out much, but perhaps you can help me in this. And that's what we're trying to achieve. The building the relations among the student community itself, just so that we're also able to stand up for each other and be pillars for each other, even when we're facing difficult situations. But because of different backgrounds and different groups of people, it's difficult to achieve that. But within small spaces of residences, within society, we're able to push things like this.
And I want to take that point and take it to you, Abushini, because I saw you nodding. Njabulo talks about perhaps diversifying the lifelines that people have on campus so that you can go to the relevant person to help deal with a particular problem that you're experiencing. At Rhodes, are you there yet?
Yes, actually, we are at Rhodes, and that's why I was nodding so much. So we face the same issue of having a large waiting list of people who want to get individual counseling. So we've diversified in the sense that we've moved it to group therapy. And at first there was resistance because you don't want to have other people kind of understanding or knowing the things that you're going through. It's quite a vulnerable experience. But we found such a positive kind of reaction to that within that group counseling that it takes away that feeling of feeling alone. It takes away that feeling of feeling that you are the only person going through that. And it takes away that feeling of isolation because you find people that are going through it and are able to help you process the things that you are going through to that journey of healing. So we definitely are there, very in terms of diversifying. So both in a counseling department side, and we've seen that filter into the residences. I think the biggest part about mental health, what I mentioned at the beginning, is destigmatizing. We come from homes where mental health is not a thing. When you are just, lying around, you can't get out of bed, you physically cannot get out of bed. It's termed as you being lazy, not you potentially being depressed. So I think having those conversations, not even with a professional, but just in our homes away from home, we automatically start that journey of destigmatizing. So I think in both aspects of departmental and also interpersonal and residence, we try to navigate that again.
And just on that, Abushini, someone on the chat, I think it was Thembekile, was saying earlier that he or she, they are at a point where they have begun to isolate because they're struggling academically and their friends are doing well. And isolation makes it difficult, does it not, sometimes to realize when someone may have a deeper problem than, let's just say, stress because you're not coping with the workload.
Definitely. And I think that's a role that I think as student leaders we've had to adopt, use that agency, not only as the SRC, but within our substructures. We have wellness representatives that we have employed to go to residences and really just have those conversations in the res rooms, whether it's how are you feeling or a suggestion box within the residence. That people have a more comfortable space to speak about those things. Because you may not be able to relate to your friendship group, but you would be able to relate to somebody else who shares the same space with you. And once you find that kind of space of comfort or some space of where you can kind of identify yourself within a different group of people, you find more comfort. It becomes easier not to isolate when you don't conform yourself just particularly a friendship group.
There you go, I'm back on. I want to come back to you, Njabulo. Something you mentioned earlier is coming back now in the chat box, and Prudy is commenting on what you were saying earlier about the waiting time, sometimes when you want to see a counselor on campus. And she says the waiting list for counseling is a serious issue. Last year, she went to the counseling department's office twice around August, and there was only space in November. And during that time, she had disappointment that was now compounding all the other turmoil that led her to seek counseling in the first place. What is the reason for resources being so limited? Does it come down to budgets predominantly?
I think it goes back to the resilience chat. It goes back to let's promote this resilience. You can do it yourself type of thing. You have it in you to push through the pain, And they sort of do that in view of the fact that there's shortages in another aspect of the mental department. And in that, they put resources into the fact that let's encourage people to build themselves up, which is not a bad thing, but there's also a need to also at the same time put resources into having therapists available, having a more accessible mental health department or student counseling department. And I wouldn't say it's budget per se, because, hey man, universities have a lot of money, and they are sometimes very reluctant to spend it depending on what it is, what that expenditure is. And I think there's a reluctance to invest in the mental health of students because, I mean, if we're being honest, universities in themselves play a very big role in the mental health of students deteriorating, you know. When we're in these spaces, it's very difficult for students to exist. And if there's a development on the university side, or a safer space that the university creates within universities, especially when it comes to academic exclusion, when it comes to financial exclusion, then perhaps you could invest less in resources. But when you're creating such a difficult space to exist, where there's so many pressures and stresses, then give us the resources to be able to deal with these things, you know.
And we're coming up to almost the end of our conversation. We've got 4 minutes or so left. And Dando, I want to come back to you on what Njabulo was talking about. Exclusion, financial, academic exclusion. It keeps coming up. We've got someone here, for example, who says that NSFAS has not released their funds. The year is coming to an end. How will they concentrate? And I wonder if universities have become better at dealing with the issue around funding, the delays in approved people, as money is reflecting or the deposits actually being made, etc. Because when I was on campus 10 years ago, some institutions were giving people problems, for example, even getting to enroll or even accessing your results at the end of the year, if you do even get to writing.
Yes, it's still a huge challenge. And of course, even with the NSFAS issue that's happening currently of these privatized banks that are, you know, paying money into students' accounts, or rather not paying money whereas they should be. So things have not gotten better at all. Things have gotten worse. And as you're saying, with the students that have their fees have not been paid, they have not been getting these book allowances, these meal allowances. These are the same students that will be coming to the SRC offices come January because they'll be failing to enroll simply because they have an outstanding debt from the previous year. So even in terms of the assistance from the university in general, with the ongoing crisis with NSFAS, it's very, very minimal. It's very limited. And even NSFAS as you know, as a business, they are very difficult to get a hold of. So even if you have not received your allowances, it's very difficult to get a hold of them to say, hi guys, I'm struggling, my book allowances have not been, you know, dispersed, my meal allowances have not been dispersed. So it's sort of as if we're working backwards, especially in terms where students, allowances, fees, and funding is really concerned.
We have spoken quite a bit about the funding just to study, for example, as a key issues back home and how those impact wilders. We've spoken about mental health more broadly, but Sigelela makes a good point here. But she says, imagine being stressed about your academics, then you have to deal with stressful roommates. Housing is another element, is it not, Abusheni, in the issues that ultimately pile stress onto students and may be a hindrance?
Yeah, definitely. I think Ms. Shanaaz actually highlighted perfectly that your environment has so much to do with your mental health and well-being. And I think especially when it comes to housing, I think that's why at the beginning they highlighted the holistic approach to mental health and well-being, to really tap into every single sphere of it if the one aspect of it is falling short. So I think that's my biggest takeaway from the presentation this morning.
Apologies. I just realized you guys could not hear me. I say, as we get to the end, it was bound to happen. I'd like to open it up now for final remarks from the three of you. I'll start with you, Njabulo. What needs to happen to improve student wellness on and off campus? How do we get there? You go first, Njabulo, then Dando, and then Abusheni, you'll have the final word.
In a gist, to assist students with their mental health and to promote student wellness, universities need to be a safer space for students. There's a huge disconnect with the university management executive and the way that students are living on the ground. They're working according to rules and institutional practices, chapter 6 of rule 6.5.7, and that's it. And it needs to move beyond that. There needs to be a certain level of empathy that is exerted by the university when students are affected by issues of food hunger, for example, or them not receiving allowances. Then the university needs to step in and say, look, guys, here's food parcels that you guys can get, or look, it doesn't matter that you're not receiving your allowances. We'll still assist you from outside and work out with NSF how they can repay the money back, because these agreements do happen. They happen for things that aren't necessarily for the students directly, but these are still mechanisms that can be tried. And as soon as we can get the systematic issues out of the way, the financial exclusion, the academic exclusion, the housing crisis, the food issue that students are faced with, then I don't think student wellness will ever be promoted in universities at all, regardless of how many therapists we could get per student, And we need to take the root out from take the illness out from the root in order for us to have a safer space within universities and feel comfortable. At this point we're very far from that, but hopefully we can continue to fight because I know as SRCs that's all we do, and the fight needs to be beyond just us. There's other stakeholders that actually need to be sensitive to students as well.
Dando, thank you. Jabulo.
Yes, I think as I previously mentioned, the universities need to make more room for, issues that are just specifically issues that students were, Black or previously disadvantaged would face. These are cultural, traditional issues that students would face, home-based issues, that students would face, not having access to the necessary technology, coming into university and not fitting in, barriers of languages that students would face in their first year. The students need, the university then further needs to, look into these residences that students are placed in, or students live in, rather, the living conditions there, the treatment that these students are receiving from their landlords, etc. To even the most basic things that serve as a threat to the livelihood of students. Like I said, your food, your toiletries, your sanitary towels that our students need on a daily basis, and then even to greater things like funding for our students, being able to register, even though you have an outstanding debt, opening up that room for negotiation to say that I only have 5,000 Rand, I cannot afford to pay, 25,000 Rand. Can I register and come back into the system? And even our students having access to their graduation certificates after they've graduated so they can look for employment.
Dando, thank you very much. Abusheni, final word?
Yes, thank you. I think the first thing is we need to talk about it. We need to always destigmatize mental health and the conversations around it. Then secondly, I think institutions need to strengthen the departments that they have there to mitigate mental health, because there's so many things that can act as an aggravating factor to your mental health deteriorating, whether it's a trigger warning, whether it's a sexual offense that has happened to you, whether it's you coming to terms with your identity, things you don't know about yourself, you identifying something different or some person different to as when you came to university. And I think student wellness needs to be at the center of everything that the university does. It needs to be at the center of the institutional development plan. It needs to be at the center of every university operation. And that is the only way that we can take it forward.
Thank you very much, Abusheni Gyala from Rhodes University, Jabulo Sobego, University of Pretoria, and Dando Mhlongo from the University of Johannesburg, all members of their respective SRC student representative councils. My thanks to you all for a very informative conversation. And as we wrap it up this afternoon, we're going to go back, in fact, where we started and hear a bit more, or close off, in fact, with remarks from Mr. Benedict Johnson, Fundi's Executive Head for Educational Business Solutions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. When one listens to all the experts, you realize there's a bigger issue at hand, and you ask yourself, does it start at university level, or do we really need to go back to your grade 9s and 10s to make sure there's proper career alignment? But what I've seen, obviously, it's that section of things, but moving on also, there's a need for health advice for physical health, counseling for mental health, assistance for financial health, advice for life assistance. It's just clear that is all the elements that a successful student needs in his life. And I think, we don't see at Fundi challenges, we see opportunities to build. And just watch the space. We will be back with a minimum viable product that addresses some of these issues, and hopefully it can help students to succeed in their studies. But thank you so much for hosting us. We need to do more of this and really delve a little bit deeper into mental health and mental wellness. Thank you so much from our keynote speaker. Let the conversation continue, and that is how we're going to get solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Benedict Johnson, Fundi's Executive Head for Educational Business Solutions. And that'll bring us to the end of our session this afternoon. I hope it has been helpful, it has been informative, and that all our guests who've spoken on this platform today have helped you walk away with something that will assist you going forward. And speaking of our guests, our thanks once more to Mr. Benedict Johnson from Fundi. Thanks to Ms. Shanaaz Kapery Randeria, psychologist who spoke to us today. And thank you to our 3 SRC leaders who are on the platform today: Njabulo Subego from the University of Pretoria, Abusheni Kyala from Rhodes University, and Ndando Mhlongo from the University of Johannesburg. And most importantly, thanks to all of you students who've joined in during the session today from about 11 o'clock this morning. We will have one of these, many more in fact, in future, as we've already done in the past. For myself, Thembekile Mrototo, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon. And many thanks to Fundi and Mail and Guardian for making it possible. Have a wonderful day further. Bye-bye.
Plato said, "Who will guard the guardians? Who are our guardians? Do they care about us? Are they accountable for their actions, or are they above the law? Who elects these guardians? Us? Them? Someone else? And if they guard us, who will guard them? Who will guard the guardians? The